if you think about the prison, the thumbprint used to be to, you'd give over your thumbprint to identify you, to power, in the system of, I guess, oppression. And now, of course, we still do the same. We use our thumb to open our phone.
So if we, just to kind of talk a little bit about Synopticon, the word itself is, reminiscent of Panopticon. The Foucauldian themes abound in this work. Foucault's text, Discipline and Punish, was a very big influence for you.
Yes.
It's interesting too that, if you could talk a little bit about some of those themes, but also interestingly how that particular text by Michel Foucault sets the scene with the plague. In
A Discipline and Punish, the Birth of the Prison, the emergence of the Panopticon is preceded by the model of the plague town and, the necessary kind of surveillance to keep people alive. A lot of the technologies of surveillance are products of consumption that are seen as desirable, things like Apple Watches that encourage you to, get up and check your steps and all this sort of stuff. But of course, they impact people very differently. You might have something to track your steps because you are a knowledge labourer and you sit down in the office a lot. You might have something to track your steps because you are an exploited labourer at the Amazon factory, or, you might have something to track your steps and your whereabouts because you're a criminal.
Let's break it down. Let's do a little bit of a virtual tour.
Okay.
So we're at the beginning of Synopticon.
When you go in, the space is very dark and there is this sort of roaming kind of spotlight that moves through the space. And this was sort of a play on that kind of, I guess, search/desire, the kind of seduction really of participating in processes of normalization and becoming visible to power. So it sort of played on these 20th century ideas of authoritarian kind of, prisons, what you imagine, the light coming from the Panopticon tower, central tower, looking and finding you. But it also has a kind of theatricality as a sort of, spotlight of a stage. So I really sort of wanted it to kind of have that tension because, of course, the internet does invite us to perform, but at the same time, it searches us out and wants to know us in that kind of Foucauldian knowledge power.
It's kind of like today, I guess, with us being so mediated by our screens, the cameras on our laptops are almost like that searchlight, spotlight, little glowing eye that's kind of surveying us.
This light that you referred to, not only is that the way through which we think that we know the world as users, it is the way that we are known. Foucault has this great quote that is, knowledge isn't made for understanding, knowledge is made for cutting. And that we are cut into our kind of user-generated profiles, separated and organised. So the spotlight does go on the floor. You can step into it or step out of it. It's looking for you, but it's up to you whether you want it to find you.
Well, I'm actually in the gallery and the lights are on, the actual fluoro lights are on. So you actually can see a detail of the wall, the black walls with the white wall mural that you've designed. And could you talk a little bit about the relationship between what you see on the walls and its and how it how it kind of is animated by that light, by that searchlight?
The wall diagram, which comprises the whole space, it's like 7,000 meters by 6 meters. It's big, it's everywhere, and it sort of sketches out some of the ideas that I was thinking about. With my abysmal handwriting, it was really important to me that it was handwritten, that it wasn't like graphic design, which would have been definitely the much easier option. But, the part that you're sitting in front of is undead past, no future, is what it sort of says in this kind of scrawled idea of temporality. At the time, it was about the ways in which, the past is never passed online. Nothing is ever deleted, and it is used for the kind of nudge algorithms that I was alluding to, and so generates the kind of futures that we have.
What else do we see in the space? We've got the searchlight, which slowly reveals the kind of monumental wall work, which I've described and which we see a detail of. What else exists in the space?
In the middle of the space, there is a sculpture which is Synopticon well. I think it's about 1 metre by 1 metre. I think it's a bit bigger than that. But it's like a well, and you sort of look down onto it. It has a mirror film on the top, and that works in a similar way to the security film, in that the parts where light is emitted, you can see the image because the pixels are activated, and the parts that are dark, it's the ambient light which then reflects, so you see yourself, and it sort of like goes in and out, and that was very much inspired by the role that our voices are also a biometric. Voices come from the body. Like, yes, we use language, but also our voices have a mystery. They seize us sometimes. I don't know about you, but I've been talking to myself a lot lately. It feels like it comes from within us, and of course, Siri is always listening. So
there's no actual voice coming from the well, though, is there?
It looks like it's trying to talk or miming, but the voice itself actually comes, because there is a sound piece, and it comes from 6 large speakers that are on the top, that come down from the ceiling and sort of echo through the space. So there is a kind of disconnect between the mouth that you see in the well as the organ of voice, and the voice that you hear that comes from above. I can't lie, the concerns about the voice and the biometrics of the voice, and Siri and Alexa, and they're all listening, but it was extremely influenced by one of my great joys. Again, it is this sort of spotlight, searchlight, pleasure, enjoyment, so seductive. TikTok is, it's a real minefield. The sounds just circulate autonomously, and people can then reperform them as sound bites. So is this voice that you don't know where it comes from? Often I don't know the context.
Giselle, you're saying that the well itself is a void that we're looking into, but we're seeing the body within the well. But when we're in the space itself, Bay 21 at Carriageworks, it is almost like that void is then enveloping us on a more kind of grander scale.
Wanted to create this idea of like a negative space, the space as full of its own negativity. How do we fill this space with the concerns of this sort of window mirror kind of positive, negative?
So that original proposal, Giselle, you talked about the mirror work. So that actually was realised, but in the second part of the gallery. Talk a little bit about what we see in that installation, and it's how true it is to your original proposal.
These are things that you might have seen in like airports or like police movies or something like that. And you see the cops in their like observation room, and you see the person being interviewed, the subject of knowledge, and they can see this way, but this person here only sees themselves. But the difference is it can switch without you knowing. So you can be like looking at this surface that you think is you, and then maybe you're taking a selfie, and then all of a sudden, maybe you're looking at somebody else, or maybe you're looking at nothing at all.
Giselle, let's go back to the beginning and talk a little bit about your proposal for Suspended Moment, the Kathy Cavalieri Fellowship. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you spelt out this dream project?
This idea of using the two-way security film or two-way security mirrors was the foundational metaphor of the piece. Kind of like this intimate, sort of blocky kind of maze that the audience could sort of go through, and the surface of the two-way mirror would change from a window in which you could see through, and inherent in my proposal was that sometimes you would see me and sometimes you wouldn't, or you might see other audience members there, but sometimes it would be a mirror, and you would see yourself, and there wasn't any way to determine whether you were looking at yourself or looking at somebody else. So that was really like the foundational idea. And that, of course, relates to the idea of user profiling, and that, you know, this sort of screen that we're on now is the way that we see the world. And it was sort of playing with the problems of what happens when the way you see the world is so purposely individuated. Of course, it always is. We're always going to see things from our perspective, even before the internet. But the problem is now with the internet, there are commercial incentives at play. And it's a problem for power to give us just what it thinks we want, and nudge us in certain directions. So the piece looks very different in the end. It went through different kinds of designs and iterations, but the idea was always there.
And so there's one more element to the exhibition.
There's a video work at the back, which is a mirror work where my body sort of comes in and out. And then, of course, there is the series of performance lectures.
One of the final performance was going to be a tribute to Kathy Cavalieri through the re-performing of her work, A Moment Alone. And so interestingly, that we all find ourselves in isolation now. But artists, you know, generally work in isolation. And, you know, that work of Kathy's A Moment Alone, which showed her, you know, which was her on a very tall 3-metre high chair, writing a stream of consciousness onto the gallery wall. Maybe just tell us a little bit about that and how now resonant that is in relation to today.
Performing the moment alone publicly makes sense in terms of the context of, you know, Synopticon. You know, this is what we are doing, performing a moment alone in public. There's so many like little winks to Kathy in the work. I was really quite conscious. Her diaries, this idea of stream of consciousness, this is even manifest on the work behind you. A lot of it was just, you know, it just sort of came out.
We were going to have 4 performances over the course of the exhibition. At the moment, these are all suspended, on hold. But can you tell us a little bit about what those performance lectures would look like?
One of the performances that I was going to do, for example, is looking at biopower and aesthetic capital and our participation in that system, you know, which is one that is oppressive and alienating. It's been really interesting to see the manner in which we exercise and transform our exercise into data. There's no way that you can talk about that now without, you know, the context of COVID. It will respond to the changes. It has to me.